Hi guys, I'm Patrick from LSAT Lab, and we're talking about the comparative passage part of every reading comp section. Every reading comp section consists of 4 passages, totaling about 27 to 28 questions, so about 5 to 8 questions per passage. And they're drawn from the same 4 topic areas. You get a humanities passage, a law, a society, a science. Since Test 52, or Test 123 under the modern numbering, 3 of those 4 passages are like a standard single passage, and one of them is really a pair of 2 shorter passages. A lot of the question types in comparative reading are the exact same as elsewhere in reading comp, main point, primary purpose, etc. But there are going to be some new tasks that are unique to comparative reading that are all about how they relate or what's in one but not the other, things of that nature. In standard reading comp, locate detail and main point are the most common question types, but in comparative reading, author opinion is king of the mountain, and method and primary purpose also become much more common than normal. Meanwhile, question types like local purpose, main point are not as emphasized, and questions like paragraph purpose, non-author opinion, and organization are almost non-existent. We cluster these question types in 4 broad categories. Some of these questions are just testing you on one passage. Which of these answers is true about passage A? Some of them are testing you on what's true for both passages. Which of these answers is true for passage A and for passage B? Some of them are testing us on a disconnect there. Which of these answer choices would be true for one passage but false for the other one? And then every other question type is testing other sorts of relationships, like how do they relate in terms of tone or scope or audience or point of view. So in our system, we refer to these clumps as just one, overlap, disconnect, and relationship. How prevalent is each of them? Well, relationship is the most common, but it's still less than half the questions, which means most of the time you're being tested on what's true or false for one or both of the passages. The relative difficulty of different question types is pretty much the same, whether it's standard reading comp or comparative reading. Main point, big picture questions, and locate detail are among the easiest, and then opinion, inference, analogy are among the hardest. In terms of those 4 buckets we showed you before, overlap tend to be the easiest, where they're asking us which of these answer choices is true for passage A and true for passage B. They're probably the easiest because you actually have 2 different chances to eliminate an answer. You can get rid of it because it wasn't true for A or wasn't true for B. There's a few common twists we see in comparative reading. When we do main point and primary purpose, the answer choices are often questions. They're asking us what question was the passage designed to answer. Analogy questions, the answer choices are usually presented as pairs of titles of these random articles we didn't read, and we got to figure out from the titles what the relationship of the passages would have been. Principal questions are usually about overlap. What principle did both authors have in mind? Method questions are usually about disconnect. What's a method that one author used but the other one did not? Attitude and meaning and context are usually more relational. The word or phrase used here in this passage is most similar to what word or phrase used here. Inference questions come in a wide variety, some of the normal types, but then some weird ones where they ask you, like, who are these authors? Where do you think this article was published? What sort of audience do you think they were writing for? Which is weirdly speculative for us to try to guess. And then finally, author opinion, the king of the mountain, comes in a lot of shapes and sizes. What's an opinion they both had? Where would they disagree? Or most complexly, what would this author probably say about this part of the other passage? There's 2 different ways to attack a comparative set. The conventional way, read both passages, think about how they relate to each other, and then go do the questions. The alternative way is that you basically pick which passage you're going to read first. Could be A or B. You just read that passage, then you head to the questions and you try to make some eliminations and maybe some selections based on what you know so far before that other passage has started to complicate your thinking. Then you go read the other passage, think about how they relate to each other, and then you head back to the questions to finalize your guess on any of the ones you started or to pick an answer on any of the ones you didn't do. Obviously, the main event in comparative reading is how do these passages relate to each other? So what are the various relationships we see? The most common one is that they're on a similar topic, but they have opposing positions. In fact, in some cases, one passage literally sounds like it's reacting to the other, like it's aware of it and responding to it. Then you have a bunch of passages where it's a similar topic and a similar position. They're more or less complementary voices. Then there are passages where it's a similar topic, but because they're focusing on different aspects of it, it's not really that their positions are the same. They're just making different points about the same topic. Another variation is that even though these authors are talking about different topics, they're kind of making the same general point, or they have the same general purpose, like they're trying to solve a problem or criticize something. And then finally, a lot of passage sets have a relationship where one is much more general, one is much more specific. And it almost feels like you could apply what you heard in the general one to the specific one. Let's play a game where we try to figure out how soon could we actually guess the relationship between these two passages. Would the first paragraph of each one be enough? Pause the video and see if you can make a guess about topic and position, whether it's similar or different for these two passages. Welcome back. You probably noticed that these two have a similar topic. They're both addressing the evolutionary origins or basis for music. But beyond that, I can't tell yet whether they have similar or different positions or the same focus. Let's go one more paragraph. Pause the video and read the next paragraph of each passage. All right, now that we're 2 paragraphs in, we can see they're both trying to answer a question like, where does music come from? And they do have different positions. One is saying it's more related to language. The other one is saying it's more related to maternal bonding. So it looks like this passage set has a similar topic, but different positions. Let's try another one. Again, pause the video and try to surmise the relationship from just these first paragraphs. Once again, we see the passages have a pretty similar topic. They're both talking about blackmail, but they do have a different focus because passage A wants to talk about it in relation to Canadian and US law, and passage B wants to talk about it in relation to classical Roman law. Let's read a little bit farther and see if we see any more connections, any more overlap or disconnect. From what we've read so far, it looks like one distinction between these two systems is that in Canada and the US, we're not exactly sure why and when it's illegal, whereas in ancient Rome, they don't really care whether it's legal, they only care about whether someone was harmed. All right, let's try one last one. Read the first paragraphs of these and see if you can guess the relationship. This one was a little bit harder to figure out, right? There's a little bit of topic overlap because A is talking about rivalry and B is talking about trying to demonstrate our superiority. So it feels like maybe they're both talking about outdoing your rivals. But in reality, you'd have to read pretty far into this one to see how they connect. It's late in passage A when we bring up this study by Solnick and Hemingway, and passage B starts right away talking about that study. So this is a good example where the relationship really doesn't get clear until later on. All right, let's take this game and move it over to a different place. Remember we said analogy questions usually offer answer choices that are pairs of titles. And from those titles of articles we haven't read, we're supposed to figure out the relationship and compare it to the relationship of the actual passages we did read. So let's pause the video and go through these 5 answers and focus on whether the topic seems similar or different, whether the position seems similar or different, or any other sort of like overlap or disconnect you can comment on. All right, welcome back. So what was the relationship in choice A? Well, they're definitely both related to the topic of gambling broadly, but the first passage, card counting, is specifically about blackjack, a form of gambling. So we could say that they're somewhat on similar topics, but A is a more narrow version, passage B is a more broad version. And they seem to have different positions. A's got a positive take, a can't lose system, and passage B has a negative take, the evils of gambling. With choice B, we can tell it's the exact same topic, Mayor McConnell, and we're just arguing different positions. A negative take, unfit to serve, and a positive take, should be reelected. With C, they're both distantly related to food or eating because a fruit tree bears food. But pruning a fruit tree is really like gardening advice. So it's kind of different topics. It's more like gardening and cooking, with some connection to food, but they are both aimed at a novice beginning audience, so they probably have a similar voice and style and purpose. With D, we're back to the idea of the same topic, the storm weather forecasting model. And in this case, again, we have opposing views. A is negative. Ugh, look at these notable failures. And B is positive. It's the best tool yet. With E, we can tell there's some topic overlap because they are both talking about building repair, but passage A feels way broader. The fundamentals of building repair versus this specific engineering report on one specific building. So E looks like a great example of a pair of passages where one of them's general, one of them's specific. You could apply passage A to passage B. Here they are as an aggregate set. Interestingly, B and D probably have to be wrong answers because they have the exact same relationship. They're both testing same topic with a negative in passage A and a positive in passage B. Let's compare these answers to the passage they came from. See if by reading the first paragraph of each, we would feel good about getting rid of any of the answers. Pause the video and think about which answers you'd eliminate. Welcome back. These passages seem pretty different, right? One is the fundamentals of justice regarding property, and the other one is like, in 1790, the Congress passed this bill. So we can definitely get rid of B and D. They are not on the same topic. And we could also get rid of choice A, because there's no way that passage A is narrower than B. It might be broader, but you can't get more narrow than 1790, the Indian Non-Intercourse Act. So we're down to C and E. If you want to pause the video one more time and read more of the passages, see if you can figure out which answer you would like. The first half of C seems okay because these have some relationship. The ending of B is definitely talking about illicitly acquiring property that is not in accordance with the principle of justice. But it would be hard to say that A and B have a similar audience, similar purpose. A feels like a general passage for law students, and B sounds more like a specific article that anyone might read. Meanwhile, E makes more sense here. A is a general discussion of property rights, and B is a specific application or situation of that. A's got a more neutral vibe, whereas B's got some opinion in the second paragraph. So the correct answer here was E. What we did initially as a drill, where we sort of looked at each answer and thought, what relationships are that answer providing? Would that actually match the passage? That's actually pretty useful for comparative reading analogy and analogy questions on normal reading comp. It's often hard to know what to pull out of the passage to apply to the answers, but the answers are so tiny and simple that you can kind of clearly see what relationship they are offering, and then just ask your brain, would that apply to the passage? All right, let's take a look at how they test the relationship between passages within the questions themselves. First, pause the video so that you can finish reading this pair of passages. Welcome back. There's one really important distinction in this passage set between how we handle blackmail here and how we think about it over here. And it comes down to the idea of free speech. In Canada and the US, you have the right to reveal an embarrassing secret about someone else because free speech protects your right to be a jerk. But in classic Roman law, you didn't have any right. If you were going to cause someone shame by revealing their embarrassing secret, you were harming them, and you weren't legally allowed to do that unless you had some good reason. This distinction between whether it's legal or illegal to reveal someone's shameful secret is key to a few of the questions in this set. Pause the video and try question 16 and 17. Welcome back. The correct answer is choice A, which gets right to the heart of whether it was legal or illegal to reveal shameful information. Roman law doesn't have free speech protections, but Canada and the US do. Now, how does that tie into the idea of whether or not there's a paradox? Well, passage A explained there's a paradox for the North American systems because you have these two acts that are each permissible on their own. I can charge someone for a service. I can reveal an embarrassing secret about someone. Free speech, bro. Whereas in Roman law, you're not allowed to reveal someone's harmful secret or even threaten to reveal it. So there is no paradox. It's not legal separately. It's already illegal just on its own. Whether you charge money for it or not, it's illegal. Let's look at why the wrong answers go beyond what we know from the passage. B makes an unsupported comparison. We have no evidence that blackmail was more prevalent in one society than another. C starts off tempting because this distinction we're talking about, the freedom to reveal your neighbor's embarrassing secret, is a freedom that Canada and the US grant that classical Roman law does not. But it's too strong to say that in general, Canada and the US grant more freedoms. This is the only subject we heard about. We don't know if elsewhere in the legal system, classical Roman law was more generous with freedoms. So in general means like for the most part, typically, usually, those are all loaded terms in reading comp we want to be cautious about. Choice D should look suspicious to us when we see that strong word, the best justification. Was our author ranking different justifications? Here are my top 5 justifications for the illegality of blackmail. Not to mention, we know that the one the author of Passage A espouses is that the way you justify blackmail is that triangular thing, that you're using the state's enforcement power as your leverage. D doesn't sound anything like that, so it doesn't align with Passage A to begin with, let alone it's too strongly worded. Choice E is also too strong. We did hear that in the Roman system, you can't reveal an embarrassing secret unless you're like a public authority with a specific interest in getting that information. But it's too much to say that in Canada and US common law, they never recognize the interest of public authorities to have certain types of information. That doesn't even pass the common sense test, so there's no way that's supported by the passages. The answer to question 17 was also A. This is a question where they're testing what is true in Passage A but false in Passage B. And as we were just discussing, blackmail combines 2 acts, charging people money for a service, and free speech, telling people about your embarrassing secret, that are each legal separately but are somehow illegal when combined. And we know that that is not true in classical Rome for the same sentence we just looked at a second ago. Even threatening to reveal your neighbor's secret was unlawful. A completes our task. It says something that's true in Passage A, false in Passage B. In terms of choice B, it is true for both that blackmail has a triangular structure because there's always the person being blackmailed, the blackmailer, and then the person, be it the government or the angry wife, that would be mad if they were to find out the blackmailee's secret. Choice C we can get rid of because it's definitely not true for Passage A. It's contradicted. We were told that we are not enforcing these precisely as written. D, just like choice B, is wrong because this is true in both passages. A blackmail victim is always paying to avoid being harmed by someone besides the blackmailer. That's literally what we mean by the triangular structure, so they're almost the same answer. E is actually messed up on multiple levels. The simplest one for us to understand is that it's really the opposite of the task. This is an idea that would be false for Passage A, but true for B. We know that in Passage A, blackmail was unique, and so it's probably fair to say it does live in a special category. Meanwhile, we know in Passage B that there was no special category for blackmail, so this would definitely seem to be true for Passage B. Let's look at 2 more questions that still reward this same key distinction of whether it's legal or illegal to reveal shameful but private information. Pause the video and try these 2. When we look at the question stem for 18, they want something that would have been illegal in Roman law, but is okay under Canadian and US common law. It sounds like our distinction. It would be okay to reveal shameful secrets of somebody else in North America, but not allowed to do that in ancient Rome. So do we have any answer that's talking about revealing someone's shameful private secret? Well, A is talking about bribing people. That has nothing to do with someone's shameful secret. This is talking about revealing a secret. Someone's been embezzling funds. This is about keeping a secret. You know, I know the defendant's guilty, but I'm going to keep it a secret and say that they're innocent. D is about revealing a secret. You're informing someone they've concealed their true income. Snitches. And E is also revealing a secret. You're revealing to the public that this politician had an adulterous affair. Are there non-adulterous affairs? There's consensual polyamorous affairs, I guess. So A and C are dead, but now we got to get more nuanced because B, D, and E were all what we thought we were looking for. You're revealing someone's shameful secret. So if we do a little rereading, like how else could we discriminate between these? Remember, in Rome, there were exceptions. Sometimes you were allowed to reveal a shameful secret, but it had to be related to like government business. Well, with B, it is related to government business, and also with D, it's related to the government tax agency. So our correct answer here would be E, because it's the only one where it has nothing to do with government business. You are just telling TMZ that your neighbor, Senator Fancy Pants, once had an adulterous affair. For this question, knowing that key distinction between legal or illegal to tell someone's secret got rid of a couple answers, but then we had to go back to the text to pick up that nuance that gets rid of the next two wrong answers. Anytime we're tortured and looking at a couple answers, if we have time, we want to think I should go research my qualms in the text, because I might see something that I forgot was even there that suddenly like opens up a doorway. And so here, seeing that little escape clause of, well, you're only allowed to reveal someone's secret if the public authorities have an interest in that secret. That would suddenly give us a new way to get rid of answers. Over to question 19, the dreaded analogy. When we're pre-gaming analogy, we're just thinking, all right, in a general sense, what is the relationship between the two ways they treat it? And we know that in Rome, it's illegal because the action of revealing a secret is itself illegal. Whereas in US, it only becomes illegal when you combine threatening to expose secrets with charging people money. So we need something reflecting the idea that like in US, it's more complicated to be breaking the law. In Rome, it's a little easier. When we look at A, what sort of relationship do we see? One country requires you to be licensed and insured, and the other one, just go do your carpentry. So do we have that sort of distinction where one country was more permissive and the other one was more restrictive? Sort of, but it would be backwards. Rome was more restrictive. North America was saying, go ahead, you can tell people secrets, just don't charge money for them. Because we would assume the first half of the answer goes with passage A, the second half of the answer goes with passage B, if anything, this would be backwards, because the first one is the more constrained, and that would match up with classic Rome. Choice B is saying that in North America, it's illegal to use cell phones only when you're on a train, whereas in Rome, it would be illegal on trains and buses. So was blackmail illegal in more contexts in Rome than in North America? No, because blackmail itself refers to when you charge money to keep a secret. It's not like there were more contexts where that was illegal in Rome, so that doesn't seem like the right distinction. The second half of C doesn't look terrible because Rome didn't allow many exemptions when it came to the rule that you're not allowed to reveal someone's secret. It was only allowed in the exceptional case of the authorities had a legitimate interest. So does it make sense to say that in Canada and the US, they allowed many more exemptions? Kind of, but I mean, it was more just a default rule that free speech allows you to say it. So kind of everybody could do it. That's not really an exemption, but we might keep this one. In D, it sounds like the first country allows gun ownership for everyone but a specific group. Whereas in the second country, Rome, gun ownership is illegal for everyone unless it's like a government thing. So that starts to sound pretty close. Let's think about how we would actually relate felons to any of this. We could say that, in Canada and the US, it's illegal to combine threatening to reveal someone's secret with the idea of charging them money. So I guess the charging money would be like that special category of a felon owning a gun. Whereas in Rome, you don't need a special category. They have no such ban because it's already illegal to threaten to reveal someone's secret unless you're doing it for the government. Let's keep that one around. The first half of E kind of has a similar vibe, that it would be illegal to combine motorcycles with racing grade engines, just like it's illegal to combine revealing people's shameful secrets with extorting money out of them. But then that would mean that Rome makes it legal to tell people's secrets. They just fine people when accidents happen. That doesn't sound at all like Rome. Rome is saying, no, it is generally illegal unless you've got a special circumstance. Ultimately, when we come back to C and D, We were trying to make a charitable case for C, but it is weaker. These aren't really deductions or exemptions. In Canada and the US, there is just a default legality to the idea of being able to say what you want. It only becomes illegal in one narrow circumstance. So that really doesn't match C. So D ends up being the correct answer, and it is a super weird one, but the idea is just gun ownership is generally legal, just like free speech is generally legal, except for one special situation, except for felons or except for when you're extorting money. And then in the other country, you don't need to ban that sort of special situation because it's just already illegal to own guns unless you're the government. So let's just reflect for a sec on the fact that 4 of the questions that went along with this passage set were all about this little distinction between is it legal or illegal in these various legal systems to reveal someone's embarrassing secret, whether or not you're charging money. If you're thinking to yourself later, like, God, a lot really hinged on that one distinction. Like, how do I trust myself to pick up on that distinction? A lot of it is just about being very interested in the subject. Like, why is it a paradox? You know, you're going to go to law school and maybe you'll be the one that can write the law article that solves the paradox. So really get in there. If you understand the paradox is that like each of these things are separately legal, so why is it illegal to combine them? Then you have a better chance when you're reading passage B of having that moment of like, oh wait, in Rome it's not even legal to have free speech? Jeez, well that's different. So really the more absorbed you get into the read, the more you're internalizing it, and so the more you'll feel your memory of one passage clash with what you're reading in that other passage. Okay, let's revisit one of the other passages we were looking at earlier, and this time get a more refined sense of how they relate and try a couple questions. So pause the video and read through these passages one more time if you need to remember what they sound like. So let's remember the overlap didn't come until the end of passage A, where we start talking about the Solmik and Hemingway study. And what we're really trying to figure out when we look at the results of this study is like, why are people choosing to make 50 grand a year rather than 100 grand a year? I get it, they make more than their neighbors, but wouldn't you rather have 100 grand than 50 grand? And the author of passage A is saying no, because what we care about primarily is just knowing that we're doing better than others. We're trying to outdo our reference group. She's putting all of this conversation under the umbrella of like, check it out, here's how rivalry affects our sense of happiness. Meanwhile, passage B is rejecting that and saying, no, the reason that you want to make more than your neighbors isn't because like you just have this need to outdo your rivals. It's because you want to feel good about yourself. You want to feel like you're adding value to the world. And if you see that you're getting paid more than other people, you're like, wow, society must think what I'm doing is pretty valuable. I guess I'm doing okay. It almost doesn't seem that different, but it's like one is sort of a petty, I'm doing better than you. And the other one is based on a, hey, I'm good enough. In fact, I'm better than them, which makes me feel like I'm good enough as a person. So it's pretty subtle, but passage B is saying it's not an ignoble tendency. It comes from our desire to know that we are actually creating value in the world. Let's look at how that distinction plays out in some of the questions. Go ahead and pause the video and try this pair of questions. Question 16 we would call an author opinion question with an undefined target. There's no great way to prephrase other than kind of reminding yourself of the main point. I know that passage B thinks the reason we want to make more money than others is because it'll make us convinced that we are contributing value to the world. The correct answer is C, which at first glance might not look like a reiteration of that main point, but it kind of is. C has a conditional form with the trigger buried in the second half of the sentence. Anytime you see if on the second half of the sentence, start from there, like read the if part first. If you believed your wealth was due merely to luck, then being wealthier than other people wouldn't make you happier. How are we supporting that? The author is saying the reason that making more money than other people makes us happy is because we see it as a proxy for how much value we bring to the world. When authors introduce cause-effect relationships, then correct answers on questions testing you what's implied by the passage flip those cause-effect relationships. We often call this flip the fact or flip the causal difference maker. So if the passage gives you that X causes Y or caused Y, A correct answer will say, well, then I guess you'd agree that if it hadn't been for X, we wouldn't have had Y. Or if we had less X, we'd have less Y. Those aren't provable ideas. They're not like bulletproof, but they're very reasonable, supportable takeaways. So if it's a squishy question stem like, what would they probably agree with? We're allowed to pick answers like that. Since we were told that feeling like you created value causes you to be happy, the flipped version of that would sound like, if you don't feel like you created value, then you wouldn't be feeling happy. Or the less you feel like you made value, the less happy. The people who felt the least like they created value had the smallest uptick in happiness. They can word it lots of different ways, but it's taking that same cause-effect relationship and kind of just flipping the light switch on it. In choice C, the trigger is basically the same as the trigger of our fake answer choice over here. If you believe that your wealth is due merely to luck, then you don't believe that your wealth was due to you creating value. And so therefore it wouldn't cause the happiness that comes from thinking you created value. So this is just a no cause, no effect type of answer. And it plays off the author's central hypothesis that the reason people want to make more money is because it makes them feel like they created value, and that is what causes them to feel happy. How about the other answers? Well, A is contradicted. The author sort of entertains this idea in the first paragraph and then goes, might sound good, but that is not the explanation best supported. So this is really the opposite of what the author would believe. B kind of brings in an out-of-scope concept about a lower standard of living, and just has loaded language. Very few people would accept it. But it almost feels like, if anything, it goes against Passage B. Passage B thinks that what you care about is relative prosperity, because then you feel like, man, that must be pretty valuable. So I think Passage B would say people probably would accept a lower standard of living in return for greater relative wealth. After all, that's what happened in the Solnick and Hemingway study. If you're only making 50 grand instead of 100 grand, you're accepting a lower standard of living, but you have greater relative wealth. D is a stretch on many levels. We never talked about gradual versus sudden increases in wages, and we never talked about job satisfaction. That's not really the same as happiness, even though job satisfaction would presumably be a component of happiness. So really, this is out of scope. If anything, it feels like it kind of goes against the passage, which is saying that as you earn more, you generally view yourself as successful, which makes you think you created value, which makes you happy. Finally, E is making a big old broad claim that, like, usually, as society becomes wealthier, happiness goes up. Well, the problem is the entire idea of Passage B is that your happiness comes from relative prosperity. So if everybody is getting wealthier, then you're not making more money than your peers. And so there's no reason for you to think, I must be extra valuable. Now I have self-esteem and happiness from that. So we can't really support E. It's a very strong claim, and it sort of goes against the causal gist of what Passage B is saying. We get our happiness from relative prosperity. Once again, when we're doing author opinion with an undefined target, a lot of times the correct answer does sound sort of main point adjacent. Our main point was the reason people feel happy being wealthier than others is because it makes them think they created more value, which makes them happy. And so this is just flipping that causal difference maker. So if they didn't believe that it was because of them creating value, they wouldn't actually feel happier. Let's turn to question 17. They want to know, what would the author B say about Passage A, saying that the Solnick and Hemingway study is an example of the phenomenon of rivalry? Well, that's the central distinction. We know that Passage B would say, you're wrong. It's not about rivalry. It's about feeling like you created value. So the specific wording we got is, yeah, this theory may sound good. It's commonly heard, but it is not the explanation best supported by the evidence. So let's look for something like, it's wrong, it's incorrect. A is saying it is mistaken its interpretation of the evidence. That part looks good. Ungenerous in its view of human nature is a little weird, but we would keep it maybe on a first pass. Similarly with B, the back end sounds like it's wrong. It's only weakly supported by the available evidence. C doesn't clearly say that the calling it rivalry is wrong. It's saying, well, the evidence is ambiguous. But that's really contradicted because our author is saying, no, there is an explanation that is best supported by the evidence. Similarly, we could get rid of D because it is saying that passage A was more or less valid to think that this is about rivalry. That's the opposite of what we want. Passage B is saying it is not valid. And then similarly, it is not strongly supported by the evidence. So we get down to choices A and B because we knew that passage B was saying this is not the right explanation. It's not rivalry. But would passage B say that's being ungenerous about human nature or flattering about human nature? Well, towards the end of passage B, it is saying these scholars, like the people in passage A, are often saying that we want to make more money than others as though it's some ignoble tendency. Ignoble is the opposite of noble, right? So it's like irredeemable, not redeemable. And meanwhile, passage B is saying this is actually a good thing for society. It's just a sign that people want to create value. So A is our best answer because she's saying, come on, you guys are being unfair to the human condition. It's not that we're petty and want to outdo our rivals. It's that we want to know we're contributing value, and this is how we can interpret that sort of thing. Once again, these are the two correct answers, and they both tie into the general idea of why do we like making money more than someone else? According to passage B, it was because it makes us feel like we are valuable. Here we've got an attitude question where we're comparing attitudes with pairs of words. What would they say about people that want to make more money than their neighbors? What does passage A have to say about these people? Well, she thinks it's an indicator of rivalry and that you're happy to be poorer as long as you're doing better than your neighbors. When we look at the adjectives we've got for passage A, B, and E stick out to me as kind of non-starters. Insular means like small-minded as opposed to like worldly and cosmopolitan. But you and your neighbors live in the same insular little neighborhood, so that's not a label for you wanting to make more money than them. It's certainly not altruistic that you want to make more money than them, and you're lucky to want to make more money. That doesn't even make any sense. So we would be down to they're happy to make more money or they are misguided to want to make more money. Okay. How is passage B describing people that want to make more money? She was saying, well, they're just seeking a sign that they create value. It's really a thing that benefits society. So when I look at this stack of adjectives, I would say it has nothing to do with being miserable or primitive. That feels like the opposite. She's painting it with a more flattering brush. D is the only answer that doesn't have a strike against it. Can we really say from passage A that she thinks that people are misguided for wanting to make more money than their neighbors? Passage B I feel pretty good about because admirable, yes, like passage B was saying, we just want to know we're creating value. That's a great thing that benefits society. She's saying it's not ignoble, it's noble, it's admirable. So ultimately D is the correct answer. The support for misguided is pretty rough. In the first paragraph, you have the author saying it's pretty paradoxical that as we make more money, we're not getting happier. And then towards the end, she's saying most people were happy to be poorer as long as they were making more money than their neighbors. Notice that I'm adding a lot of sarcastic tone to this because I'm trying to see could I infer some tone here that I didn't read the first time? And then in the last paragraph, she's saying that even though East Germany was seeing their living standards rise a lot, they actually were unhappy because they were comparing themselves to West Germans rather than just comparing their own situation to how it used to be. So is this misguided? It's not really great support, but it is the best available answer. When you think of it as a pair, it makes more sense. That A is portraying this more as humans are petty. They'll kind of self-sacrifice making 100 grand. They'd rather shoot themselves in the foot and make 50 grand as long as they're making more than their rivals. Whereas passage B was playing up the idea of this isn't about some ignoble desire to outcompete your rivals. It's about our very admirable desire to create value for the world. Finally, question 18 is asking why they're each mentioning the study. Passage A is bringing up the study to talk about rivalry. It was one of the two things she identified in the first paragraph that keep us from being happier even though we're getting wealthier. So she's certainly not presenting anything she'll argue against. This study is brought up as her evidence for how rivalry affects our sense of happiness. So we can get rid of A and B. And then with E, she's not introducing the main topic. The main topic is that happiness and income don't go hand in hand for two reasons: habituation and rivalry. So there's no way to say that rivalry was more important than habituation. Neither one of them is the main topic on its own. Do C and D make sense? Did Passage A bring up this study to provide evidence for one explanation of a phenomenon? Well, the phenomenon being discussed is that people don't get happier even though their income's going up. There are two explanations for that: habituation and rivalry. And this is about rivalry. So it is, the study is evidence for the rivalry explanation of the phenomenon where we don't get happier even though we're making more money. Okay, we can make that work. With passage B, we know the study was the entire centerpiece of why that passage got written. It was like, people normally interpret this study to mean X, but it really means Y. So let's look for something like that. Is passage B presenting a view? Sure, I mean, the Solnick and Hemingway study helps to present the view that humans care a lot about one-upsmanship. We get this weird pleasure about, having a bigger house than our neighbors. But our author isn't going to follow that up with additional evidence. She follows it up by saying, this is not the explanation best supported by the evidence. In fact, let me tell you the real explanation. So the second half of C is contradicted. So D is our correct answer here. If we were nervous about the idea of is it really the main topic? In every paragraph in passage B, we are talking about the idea of relative prosperity. And the Solnick and Hemingway study was showing that people prioritize relative prosperity over absolute prosperity. They care more about making more relative to neighbors than making more in terms of their actual salary. When we see answer choices like these two questions had, where each answer choice has a little snippet for passage A, a little snippet for passage B, you can kind of decide whether you'd rather deal with one passage at a time or deal with one pair at a time. When we did that last question, just thinking about passage A got us down to C and D. When we did that for the previous question, where we just thought about passage A, it was a little bit murkier. None of them felt great. We thought maybe happy was probably the most reasonable, but it was hard to know. For the attitude question, it was a little bit easier to like the correct answer by thinking about that pair of ideas together. A was more like a negative, misguided. B was more like a positive, admirable. Whereas for the other question, it didn't really matter. They just felt like separate entities and you could kind of judge them separately. What I would say for myself is I usually will try to judge them separately because that's a little bit easier of a thought process. But I've learned that some of these imperfect correct answers, like D on the one on the left, you really only like when you think about it together and you sort of magnify the small difference. So if you're having trouble completely falling in love with any answer, you might need to relax your standards a little bit and just get more gisty and think, well, yeah, okay. Taken together as a pair of adjectives, A would lean more towards misguided and B would lean more towards admirable. Even if I don't feel like I can fully prove misguided, I can justify that they're split along those dimensions. All right, everybody, that'll do it. Good work, tough stuff, not my favorite topic. Make sure at some point you check out that other video we have on comparative reading where it walks you through the alternative strategy where you just focus on one passage at a time. Until next time, I will see you. Good luck.